جرح لا يزال ينزف، حروب وعقوبات واجتياح وعدوان ليس على الأرض والشعب فحسب، بل على الثقافة والحضارة العراقية. محكمة بروكسل قامت من أجل العراق، ولكن ماذا حققت وما ومن تعني قراراتها؟ محكمة بروكسل من الداخل. معكم زينب الصفار، تابعونا. أما آن الأوان لمجلس حقوق الإنسان أن ينهض ويبدأ التحقيق في الآلاف والآلاف من جرائم الحرب التي ترتكبها القوى المحتلة بقيادة أمريكا وبريطانيا في العراق. قائل هذا الكلام هو منسق جمعية SOS العراق التي نظمت الحملات والوفود الغربية لزيارة العراق لمراقبة التأثيرات المدمرة للعقوبات الأممية على بلاد الرافدين بين عامي 97 و2003، وهو المنسق المساعد للحملة العالمية المناهضة لاغتيال الأكاديميين العراقيين. هو البلجيكي ديرك أدريانسنس أحد مؤسسي محكمة بروكسل، وهي شبكة عالمية من المفكرين والفنانين والناشطين الذين يستنكرون منطق الحرب الدائمة الذي روجت له الولايات المتحدة وحلفاؤها، والذي خيم على منطقة الشرق الأوسط بالتحديد. إذن هذه المحكمة تسعى لأن تمد الجسور بين مقاومة المثقفين في العالم العربي وحركات السلام الغربية. المؤلف والكاتب السياسي ديرك أدريانسنس كيف يعرف ماهية محكمة الشعب، وكيف يقوم تجربة محكمة بروكسل من أجل العراق، هذا البلد الذي ما زالت جراحه ترعف وتفيض كل يوم. وماذا حققت هذه المحكمة حتى الآن؟ وماذا بشأن الحروب وانتهاكات حقوق الإنسان في المنطقة اليوم؟ وهل يأتي كل ما يحصل ضمن استراتيجية إعادة استعمار المنطقة؟ وما مدى أهمية هذه المحكمة في تثقيف الرأي العام الغربي والحركات الشعبية في أوروبا عن الممارسات اللانسانية للمحتل والمعتدي؟ Mr. Derek Adriansens, coordinator of SOS Iraq and member of the executive committee of the Brussels Tribunal, welcome to the Inside. Sir, first of all, tell us, what is the Brussels Tribunal? How, when, and why was it founded?
In 2003, March 2003, when the American forces, Anglo-American forces, invaded illegally sovereign country Iraq, there was a meeting in the European Parliament of the Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation. And there were people from many countries all over Europe and even Turkey and so on. And they all had the same idea to revive the People's Court, because the politicians of the countries that were invading Iraq did not listen to their own people, because millions marching in the street and nobody listened. So the only thing that we could do at that time is to morally condemn this illegal invasion and to find tools in the international law that could serve for real lawyers to go to real courts afterwards. So what we were doing was, but it was not just a kangaroo court like they call it, but it's in fact the moral conscience of the world community that was brought together in a 2-year endeavor in 24 countries, of which the Brussels Tribunal was the first session. And
so you mean that all the people who belong to the Brussels Tribunal who thought about this idea were legal experts who thought that we have to do something legal-wise in order to try and find a solution for this kind of invasion against...
Yes, legally, well, because it's not a real court, but the conclusions can serve as the basis for real lawyers to go to real courts.
And try the people who were responsible
Yes,
for the war
yes,
crimes.
certainly.
And yes.
So we were the first session, and we researched the project for the new American century. You know, the invasion of Iraq and other countries was already written down in paper, so everybody could read that they would attack Iraq and other countries.
How effective is the Brussels Tribunal? What has it achieved so far?
It has achieved a lot in the sense that we stopped the history from being rewritten. We want to be, we want to counter the propaganda of the invading forces. We don't want victor's justice. We want justice for the people who lived under the bombs, and we want to tell their story. So we monitored the occupation. We included most of the people who were involved in the World Tribunal on Iraq, specialists in counterinsurgency, war, specialists in investigating where the money went and so on. We have the most extensive list of murdered academics. We started that campaign, in fact, about the destruction of the middle class.
Here, in the sense, sir, we know about the Kuala Lumpur Tribunal. It found that former President, U.S. President George W. Bush and former Prime Minister, UK Prime Minister Tony Blair were guilty of war crimes.
And crime against peace.
What about the other world leaders who joined the track of the US-led forces, and they also participated, they dispatched their forces in the invasion against Iraq? And how effective is such kind of decision? How can it be put into practice?
Well, what happened was, for instance, in Spain, prior to the abolition of the law of universal justice, we filed a complaint for genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes against 4 British prime ministers and 4 American presidents, because it started, in fact, with sanctions.
Back in the 1990s.
They dismissed it.
Right.
So they dismissed it. We also have tried to, under the same law in Belgium, bring Tommy Franks before the court. The law was changed, and the Americans threatened Belgium to withdraw SHAPE and NATO from the territories and so forth. So we're facing a tough enemy, but still, all these efforts, they contribute to
educate the people.
Yes, and to a conscience. Because if Bush goes to, I don't know, Geneva, or he wants to visit Canada, or I don't know where, or Germany even, there will be groups that will go to the prosecutor and say, we file a complaint. And they can use all the conclusions of the World Tribunal, the Brussels Tribunal, the Kuala Lumpur,
and
which was...
he will be chased out?
He will not be chased out, but he fears that he will be prosecuted, and so he doesn't come.
Right. Now, what is the perspective of the Brussels Tribunal on Iraq, and not just on Iraq, but on a number of wars and aggressions that took place in the region, especially, you know, regarding vis-a-vis the situation on Syria?
Well, I think Syria is a more difficult matter in the sense that, yes, there was a general popular uprising, and on the other hand, you have 29 countries who are involved to join this so-called uprising and turn it into a sort of imperial chaos. And they want the regime of Saddam Assad
of
gone.
Assad to be toppled.
And so now it's very obvious that it's not a genuine uprising anymore.
So you think that the wars that have been taking place in the region are on the same track and the same strategy of recolonization of the region?
Yeah, that is obvious. I mean, the plans of the neocons were to attack 7 countries in 5 years, including Libya, Syria. Now, they were stuck in Iraq for a while because of the fierce resistance of the Iraqi people. But then they had to withdraw because of that resistance, because the people didn't want the Americans there.
Did they actually withdraw, Dirk?
They did not withdraw.
They withdrew back from Iraq, but you know, at the same time they left one of the biggest embassies that has approximately 15,000 staff.
They did not withdraw.
And they have all the contracts, and they have
everything.
They have everything there.
I know, and you know, the Trade Bank of Iraq goes through JP Morgan Bank, and they have meetings. All the ministries have meetings with the American administration, who is still in the embassy. So yes, they are very clearly monitored and advised by the Americans. I give you the example of France. If Marshal Pétain would have stayed on when the Germans were defeated, it would seem impossible. And yet, the same prime minister that is now appointed by under occupation is still in power. And this is something we have a hard time to understand. There is more. The goal of the Americans, it's now clear, was the total destruction of Iraq, like they want the total destruction of Libya, the total destruction of Syria. They want chaos in order to have the resources. First, and second, to install an extreme neoliberal
trend
economic system. Because if you see the countries that are under attack now had a sort of semi-socialized economy where the goods were sort of distributed among the people. And now you see the result in Iraq. You know, there's huge corruption. Oil is being stolen even by the Americans. The metering system is not yet repaired, and it's very easy. There was a conference in Paris in 2011, a UN conference, and they were saying, you know, it was an American firm that was responsible for the metering. They were attacked because they could not solve an easy problem as metering the oil. So the oil is still being stolen. The economy is in ruins. Imagine when Bremer came, Paul Bremer, he had 3 people to privatize the whole economic structures, so all the factories in Iraq, and he wanted to do it in a few weeks. While in Eastern Germany, when the wall fell, there were 8,000 people working for years to privatize the whole economy. So you see
how they are robbing the resources of Iraq. Right, Dirk, Mr. Dirk Adriansen's, we're going to stop now for a short break, and then after the break we'll talk a bit about how the Brussels Tribunal is educating the European public opinion about what is going on here in the region. Right, a short break and we'll be back. Stay tuned.
منسق منظمة إنقاذ العراق SOS العراق البلجيكي ديرك أدريانسنس كيف يصف الدور الذي تؤديه محكمة بروكسل لتثقيف الرأي العام الأوروبي ولتعزيز هذه الحركة المناهضة للحرب؟ وما أهمية هذا الدور لدى الحركات الشعبية في أوروبا؟
We try to be a bridge between the resistance, intellectual resistance in the Arab world and the peace movements in the West, so that their viewpoints can match more than they do now. Some movements are very good and they're on the same level, but some don't understand very well what's going on, and they think, for instance, that Iran is having nuclear weapons, or I don't know what. It's a bit. It's difficult to translate the message, because we need translators. We need people who translate the Arab voice into English, to get information across that is not available in English, because the media don't want to cover certain things. And we continue to monitor the situation very, very closely, especially in Iraq, but also in the whole region. So we try to teach the people about non-intervention, about the fraud of humanitarian intervention that is nothing less than recolonization of the region. We also want to instruct them about the counterinsurgency war, which is very, very important. Iraq, for instance, was not destroyed by a sectarian war. The sectarian war was nothing more than US-sponsored death squads who were trying to create tensions.
It was a means, yes, to spread the sectarian strife among the Iraqis.
Yes, because that didn't exist prior to 2000.
How important is the Brussels Tribunal in the mass movements in Europe? I mean, we all know that higher military budgets mean a decrease in the social security, which is at the heart of the austerity measures.
We also want to, we have a hard time explaining that, but if we do, people understand. We seem to be living in two worlds. On the one hand, there is an economic crisis, and we have to save the planet, and we have to ride our bicycles instead of cars, and so on. On the other hand, there's a war which costs billions and billions of dollars. According to Professor Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winner in economics, the war has cost something like $5 billion. Now, what can you do with that money? One day in Iraq war, you can build, for instance, 18,000 houses, and there's a housing crisis in the US. And so you can give those examples, and people understand that. And you can say, well, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Who's paying for these wars?
Right.
Because, yeah, you can have short profits when you sell arms, but who's paying $5 billion? Who? So part of the crisis is caused by these war efforts, and that's what we have to bring to the people, that this crisis and the war are linked. And if we do so, people understand. But in the press, there are two worlds, and both of them are very much apart, and they are never linked.
Because we know that the media outlets, certain countries, are so much, controlled by people who are affiliated with certain lines of thought or certain countries and imperial powers. But my question here is, those soldiers that are recruited with the US-led NATO forces, how far, to what extent are they conscious of the nature and objectives of the wars they are going to?
You mean the American soldiers?
Yes, sure.
Well, you know that the suicide rate of soldiers who return from Afghanistan and Iraq is very, very high.
And not just the American forces, but also the Brits and...
The British forces also.
Yeah.
Well, they recruit people, especially in America, from Hispanic origin or black people, from the poor classes, the lower classes. Some of them speak up afterwards. And they join organizations like Iraqi Veterans Against the War, who do very good work, who organize marches and meetings and even write books like Winter Soldiers, which is a brilliant book. So all these efforts, and this is also an important part of the Brussels Tribunal, we try to be a network, a worldwide network that has contacts with all these organizations. Because as you know, especially the interest in Iraq is waning. So our work is the more important, because now, for instance, there are marching millions of people in the Iraqi streets, and nobody talks about it, or people say that it's a sectarian uprising or something, which it is not.
Just recently, you know, we had reports that say that 25,000 children are abducted in Iraq.
Yeah. Which is another...
This is a very painful reality. In the context of the paper that you addressed to the legal conference held in Beirut, which is titled Palestine from Settlement to Violation of Human Rights, what can you tell us about the findings of your paper concerning the plight of the Palestinian refugees in Iraq?
Well, it seems that for Palestinians, the world is a daily Nakba. They are harassed, in Iraq certainly harassed, being locked up.
Everywhere?
Yes, in Syria now too. You know, imagine the Iraqi Palestinians, well, some could enter Syria, and they are now fleeing Syria and go to Jordan or something, but most of them are still on the borders of Syria and Jordan. In tent camps, and they are dying. So there were some 34,000 Palestinians in Iraq, and now there are only 10,000 left, and they are still under attack of sectarian forces. Sectarianism that was brought in, as I said before, by the American occupier to divide and rule.
Not the sectarian. There is no sectarianism inside Iraq, but it is. You're saying it is imported from the outside, from various countries, maybe the neighboring countries, and it came into Iraq, and they've been harassing the Palestinian. Now, wherever there has been an invasion by US-led NATO forces, so to say, and the Palestinians were faced hostilities from those forces. Why?
But not only the Palestinians were targeted. This is the question.
They target the people of the country, but also the Palestinians who are homeless in these countries also. They are refugees, not only in Iraq, but also in Kuwait, in Lebanon, and now in Syria.
Many of those Arab regimes have links with the Zionists, and Israel is very afraid for the right to return, which Palestinians have under international law. So whenever they see a chance, they will of course attack the Palestinians there. In the best case, to chase them away or lock them up. In the worst case, they kill them. And there's another reason why Palestinians get killed, because the Palestinian people If you think of Palestine, you think of resistance. You don't think only of resistance against Zionist colonialism, but you think of resistance in general. So the Palestinian example is, according to these warmongers, not an example to follow. So they consider them all as terrorists, or people who
should be wiped out.
Yes, who should be wiped out.
Yes. Now, in one of your recent articles, and here let me go back to the issue of Iraq, on Iraq, published in the Global Research, you say 2013, the year of accountability and restoring justice for Iraq. How? Quickly, if I may ask.
Well, we have to do something. I don't know if it's going to work. Probably not. It will work in the long term, maybe. But
why are you so pessimistic?
I'm not pessimistic. It will happen, but not in 2013, maybe.
Yeah.
Because you know that Vietnam is still paying reparations to the Americans now, after the Vietnam War, for all sort of things. It's amazing. People don't know, but and Iraq is still paying reparations to Kuwait for their invasion in '91. But who is going to pay for the reparations inside Iraq because of the illegal invasion? Someone should be held responsible. But if we see the cases like the mass murder in Haditha, where the American soldiers who exterminated whole families,
it's a mass
they get off the hook.
Yes.
What kind of justice is that?
Complete impunity. We hope that we can find a limit to such complete impunity, because we have here to say something concerning Bangladesh, where it had its courts try collaborators and criminals at the national courts. When are we going to reach this, when those were criminals against people and innocent civilians in the Middle East be tried in such a sense? Mr. Dierk Adriaensens, coordinator of SOS Iraq and member of the executive committee of the Brussels Tribunal, many thanks indeed for joining us on the Inside.
It was glad to be here.
إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة، ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل theinside@almayadeen.net. إذا theinside@almayadeen.net. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.